Sometimes the cruelest thing an alpha can say is not goodbye. It is wait for me. Caleb Monroe learned that lesson on a winter night in Chicago, standing barefoot beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Whitmore's penthouse while snow drifted across the city like ashes from something beautiful that had already burned out. Below him, downtown glittered in gold and silver, alive with traffic, music, and people rushing home to someone who expected them. But inside the penthouse, everything felt painfully still. Ethan had left 3 hours earlier for another family dinner, another business conversation, another obligation that somehow always came before Caleb. The dinner Caleb made for him sat untouched on the marble kitchen island. Lemon herb chicken. Roasted potatoes. The comfort meal Ethan used to ask for after exhausting board meetings. Caleb had reheated it twice, each time telling himself not to be dramatic, not to take it personally, not to turn one late night into proof that love was fading. His phone buzzed softly against the counter. A single message lit up the screen. Running late. Do not wait up. Caleb stared at the words for a long moment, then gave a small, tired laugh that did not sound like him. Because Ethan knew exactly what Caleb would do. Caleb always waited. That was the problem. 5 years earlier, Ethan Whitmore had walked into Caleb's life like a storm, wearing an expensive suit and carrying impossible promises in his quiet gray eyes. Caleb still remembered the first night they met at a charity gala downtown. Caleb had been working catering to help pay rent after college, balancing champagne glasses while wealthy alphas discussed investments worth more than his entire future. Ethan had stood apart from everyone else, cold and untouchable, staring through the ballroom windows as if the skyline outside was the only thing in the room that did not want something from him. Most people in Chicago feared Ethan Whitmore. Youngest executive in Whitmore Holdings history. Ruthless negotiator. Ice-cold alpha heir to an empire built on old money, colder secrets, and a family name that opened every door. But Caleb had not seen the powerful businessman everyone whispered about. He had seen a lonely man hiding inside a perfect life. And loneliness recognized loneliness. Their relationship started quietly after that. Secret dinners. Late-night drives through the city. Ethan appearing at Caleb's tiny apartment at 2 a.m, exhausted enough to fall asleep at the kitchen counter while Caleb made coffee. Back then, Ethan would loosen his tie, rest his forehead against Caleb's shoulder, and breathe like he had finally found the one place in the world where he did not have to perform. In those moments, Caleb believed he was loved. Ethan never said the words easily, but he touched Caleb's wrist while reading emails, pulled him closer during thunderstorms, and kissed his forehead before sleep with a tenderness he showed no one else. It felt real enough to build a future around. So Caleb waited. He waited through cancelled anniversaries and missed birthdays. He waited while Ethan climbed higher inside the brutal world of Whitmore Holdings. He waited every time Ethan whispered, soon. Just a little longer. Wait for me. At first, the words sounded romantic, like they were surviving something temporary before finally reaching happiness together. But somewhere along the way, waiting became Caleb's entire life. His friends stopped inviting him places because he always canceled if Ethan suddenly became available. His family stopped asking when they would finally meet the alpha he loved. Even Caleb's own apartment disappeared after Ethan asked him to move into the penthouse temporarily. Temporary became 4 years. 4 years of living inside Ethan's world without truly belonging to it. Caleb looked around the silent apartment now, his chest tightening. The penthouse was beautiful in the way museums were beautiful. Expensive. Polished. Cold. Every detail looked perfect, but none of it felt like home tonight. His gaze drifted to the framed photograph near the bookshelf. It had been taken last summer in Maine during one rare weekend Ethan managed to escape work. Caleb was laughing in the picture, sunlight tangled in his brown curls while Ethan stood behind him with one hand resting against his waist. Ethan had almost smiled that day. Almost. Caleb picked up the frame carefully and traced the edge with his thumb. How much longer? He whispered to the empty room. Outside, snow continued falling over Chicago in soft white silence while somewhere across the city, Ethan Whitmore sat at another table full of powerful people, telling the Omega who loved him most to wait just a little longer. And Caleb Monroe, Exhausted in ways even he did not fully understand yet, was finally beginning to wonder what would happen if one day he simply stopped waiting forever. By February, Caleb could tell what kind of night it would be just by the way Ethan loosened his tie when he stepped through the penthouse doors. If the tie came off before the shoes, Ethan had lost another battle with the board. If the jacket disappeared first, it meant another fight with his father. And if Ethan entered still wearing every perfect layer of his charcoal suit, silent and unreadable, it meant something worse. Those were the nights Caleb learned to stay quiet. Tonight was worse. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime just after midnight, and Caleb looked up from the couch, his book forgotten instantly. Ethan crossed the living room without a word. Snow melted slowly from the shoulders of his wool coat. His scent, usually sharp like cedar and winter air, carried exhaustion so heavy Caleb felt it before Ethan even looked at him. "You are home late," Caleb said gently. Ethan only hummed before stopping beside the bar near the windows. He poured himself a glass of bourbon with steady hands, but Caleb noticed the tension in his shoulders, the tiny stiffness that appeared whenever Ethan was trying not to let the world crush him completely. Caleb stood and walked toward him. "Did you eat anything?" "Not hungry." "You skipped lunch too." Ethan finally glanced at him, gray eyes shadowed beneath the city lights. "You keep track of everything, do you know that?" Caleb smiled softly. "Someone has to." For a moment, the tension eased. Ethan reached out automatically, fingers brushing Caleb's wrist like muscle memory. That small touch used to make Caleb feel safe. Now it only reminded him how little he truly had. Ethan touched him in private. Needed him in private. Loved him in private. But the moment sunlight touched the windows, Caleb became invisible again. The next morning proved it. Caleb stood inside the massive walk-in closet holding 2 ties while Ethan adjusted his cufflinks near the mirror. "Blue or silver?" Caleb asked. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "Silver." Caleb stepped closer and fixed the tie carefully against Ethan's throat. It was such an intimate routine now that neither of them thought about it anymore. Caleb knew exactly how Ethan liked his collars folded. Ethan knew Caleb always stole his sweaters when he felt anxious. They shared a bed, a kitchen, a life hidden high above Chicago. But somehow they still did not share a future. "You are coming home tonight, right?" Caleb asked quietly. Ethan paused. Just long enough to hurt. "There is another dinner." Caleb lowered his hands slowly. "Another family dinner?" "Yes." Ethan slipped his watch onto his wrist without meeting Caleb's eyes. "My father invited the Vale family." Caleb felt something cold settle inside him. Adrian Vale. Rich Omega. Old money. Perfect reputation. The kind of Omega the Whitmore family would proudly place beside their heir in magazine photos and charity headlines. Caleb had heard the name for months now, whispered during calls Ethan always claimed were unimportant. "It is business," Ethan said quickly, finally noticing the silence. "You know how my father is." Caleb nodded because that was what he always did. He understood. He waited. He gave Ethan the benefit of the doubt so often that doubt had become the only thing left. Ethan stepped closer then, warm hands settling against Caleb's waist. "Do not look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you are already leaving." Caleb forced a small smile. "I am still here." Ethan relaxed slightly at those words, as if Caleb's loyalty was the one thing in his life he never questioned. Then he leaned down and pressed a soft kiss against Caleb's forehead before heading toward the elevator. Just before the doors closed, Ethan looked back and said the words Caleb had begun to hate more than anything else in the world. "Wait for me." "Okay?" The elevator disappeared downstairs. Silence flooded the penthouse again. Caleb stood motionless beside the windows long after Ethan left, staring at his reflection in the glass. Then he realized something that made his throat tighten. He could not remember the last time Ethan had asked him to come with him anywhere at all. Caleb should have known something was wrong the moment Ethan asked him not to come downstairs. The Whitmore family charity gala happened every March at the Blackstone Hotel, a marble landmark overlooking Lake Michigan where Chicago's wealthiest families gathered beneath crystal chandeliers and fake smiles. Usually Caleb avoided those events entirely. It hurt less that way. But this time Ethan came home 2 nights earlier than expected, wrapped his arms around Caleb in the kitchen, and quietly asked him to stay in the penthouse during the gala. It will only make things harder tonight, Ethan murmured against Caleb's hair. Caleb remembered standing frozen while pasta water boiled softly behind them. Harder for who? Ethan sighed. Caleb. That single word carried the weight of another unfinished conversation neither of them wanted to survive. So Caleb stayed home. At least, that was the plan. But by 7:30 that evening, loneliness had settled over the penthouse so heavily Caleb could barely breathe. Every room felt haunted by Ethan's absence. His coffee cup still sat beside the sink. One of his jackets hung over the dining chair. The scent of cedarwood lingered faintly in the hallway like a memory refusing to leave. Caleb tried reading. Then television. Then cleaning countertops that were already spotless. Nothing helped. Finally, with shaking hands and a pain he could not explain, he opened his phone and searched the gala online. The Whitmore Foundation livestream appeared instantly. Caleb almost closed it. Instead, he pressed play. The ballroom glowed in gold and silver beneath enormous chandeliers. Wealthy alphas and omegas drifted across polished floors in custom gowns and tuxedos worth more than Caleb's first apartment lease. Cameras flashed constantly. Reporters smiled too brightly. Everything looked beautiful in the cold, artificial way expensive things often did. Then Ethan appeared on screen. Caleb's breath caught. Ethan stood near the center of the ballroom in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, broad shoulders straight, expression calm and unreadable beneath the lights. He looked exactly like the man Chicago newspapers called untouchable. Powerful. Elegant. Completely out of reach. And beside him stood Adrienne Vale. Adrienne was beautiful in the effortless way magazine covers demanded. Soft blonde hair. Pale skin. Gentle smile. He wore a silver Omega pin from one of the oldest families in Illinois, and when he laughed at something Ethan said, reporters instantly turned their cameras toward them like flowers reaching for sunlight. Caleb stared silently as Ethan rested one hand against Adrienne's back. It was not romantic. Not intimate. Barely even noticeable. But Caleb felt it anyway. Because Ethan had never touched Caleb like that in public once. The live stream comments moved fast beneath the video. They look perfect together. Future Whitmore couple for sure. Beautiful alpha and omega pairing. Caleb closed the comments, but the damage had already landed. A sharp pressure tightened behind his ribs. Suddenly the penthouse felt too quiet, too high above the city, too far away from anything real. His phone buzzed against the couch beside him. Ethan. Caleb answered immediately, hating himself for how quickly hope still bloomed every time Ethan called. Hey, Ethan said softly. Music and conversation echoed faintly behind his voice. Why are you out of breath? Caleb had not realized he was. I was cleaning. Silence lingered for a second too long. Ethan always knew when Caleb was lying. You watched the live stream. It was not a question. Caleb closed his eyes. Everyone thinks you and Adrienne are together. Ethan exhaled slowly. It is politics. You touched him. Caleb. You smiled at him. This time Ethan's voice hardened with exhaustion. What do you want me to do tonight? Embarrass my family in front of half the city? Caleb flinched even though Ethan had not raised his voice. The pain came from how reasonable Ethan sounded, as if Caleb's heartbreak was inconvenient compared to stockholders and board members and family expectations. Ethan softened a moment later. Listen to me, he said quietly. You know what you are to me. Caleb looked around the empty penthouse. The hidden apartment. The hidden life. The hidden relationship. Do I? Another silence. Then Ethan spoke the words Caleb had started hearing in his nightmares. Just wait a little longer. Caleb pressed one hand against his chest because suddenly it hurt to breathe. Down below, somewhere beyond the windows, Chicago glittered with life and movement, while on the television screen Ethan Whitmore stood beside another Omega beneath flashing cameras, looking exactly like a man preparing for a future Caleb was never meant to be part of. Spring arrived slowly in Chicago, but Caleb barely noticed. Days blurred together inside the penthouse like rain sliding down glass. Ethan became busier after the gala, swallowed by meetings, interviews, and endless dinners with families Caleb only knew from newspaper headlines. Sometimes Ethan came home after midnight smelling like expensive whiskey and exhaustion. Other nights he did not come home until sunrise. Caleb stopped asking questions because every answer hurt more than silence. The worst part was how normal everything still looked from the outside. Ethan still kissed Caleb's forehead before leaving. Caleb still made coffee every morning exactly the way Ethan liked it, black with 1 spoonful of sugar, even though Ethan always claimed he was trying to quit sugar. They still slept in the same bed whenever Ethan actually came home. Ethan still reached for Caleb in the dark like Caleb was comfort, warmth, and forgiveness all at once. But something inside Caleb had begun quietly unraveling. It happened in small moments at first. One Tuesday afternoon, Caleb walked into a bookstore near Oak Street and froze when he saw a magazine cover near the register. Ethan stood beside Adrian Vale beneath bold silver letters announcing Chicago's most eligible future couple. Caleb stared at the cover so long the cashier finally asked if he wanted to buy it. He left the store without answering. Another night Caleb attended dinner at his younger sister Emma's apartment in Lincoln Park. Emma had never liked Ethan. Not openly. She was too polite for that. But she always watched Caleb with worried eyes whenever Ethan's name came up. "You look tired," she said quietly while washing dishes after dinner. Caleb forced a smile. "I am fine." Emma dried her hands slowly before turning toward him. "When was the last time he chose you first?" The question settled into Caleb's chest like a stone. He opened his mouth automatically, ready to defend Ethan the way he always did. But no words came out. Because he could not remember anymore. Later that week, Ethan invited Caleb to lunch downtown between meetings. Caleb almost felt hopeful again walking into the sleek Italian restaurant overlooking the river. Ethan looked handsome in a navy suit, silver watch glinting beneath sunlight pouring through the windows. For the first 20 minutes, things almost felt normal. Ethan reached across the table while talking business, his fingers brushing Caleb's hand in that absent-minded way that still made Caleb's body remember love before his mind remembered pain. He even smiled when Caleb teased him about working too much. Then Ethan's phone rang. Everything changed instantly. Caleb watched Ethan's expression sharpen into the cold, unreadable mask the rest of the world knew so well. "It is my father," Ethan murmured before answering. Caleb looked away politely, focusing on boats drifting across the river outside. But then Ethan said something that made his entire body go still. "Yes, I will bring Adrian on Saturday." Silence. Ethan listened for another moment before replying calmly. "No. Caleb will not be there." The ache hit so suddenly Caleb almost dropped his water glass. Ethan noticed immediately after ending the call. "Caleb. Why not?" Ethan rubbed tiredly at his temple. "Because my father wants the event to look a certain way." Caleb laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "A certain way. You know how these people think. And what exactly am I to them?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Do not do this here." "No, tell me." Caleb's voice remained calm, which somehow made the moment hurt more. "Am I embarrassing? Temporary? Something you hide until your real future arrives?" A couple seated nearby glanced over before quickly looking away. Ethan lowered his voice. "You are overthinking this." Caleb stared at him in disbelief. 5 years. 5 years of waiting, sacrificing, understanding, hiding, and shrinking himself smaller and smaller to fit inside Ethan's complicated life. And somehow his pain was still being treated like an inconvenience. Ethan reached for his hand again. "After the merger is finalized, things will calm down." Caleb pulled his hand back slowly before Ethan could touch him. "You said that last year." Ethan looked genuinely frustrated now, like he could not understand why Caleb was suddenly making everything harder. "What do you want from me?" Caleb almost answered immediately. "Choose me. Publicly. Honestly. Completely." But the words died inside him because deep down he already knew the truth. If Ethan wanted to choose him, he would have done it long ago. Outside the restaurant window, Sunlight shimmered across the Chicago River, while inside Caleb Monroe sat across from the man he loved and realized something devastating. Ethan Whitmore kept asking him to wait because Ethan had never truly planned to stop keeping him hidden at all. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday in April, hidden inside a conversation Caleb was never supposed to hear. It started with something painfully ordinary. Ethan had forgotten his laptop at home again. Caleb noticed it sitting on the kitchen counter around 6 in the evening, while thunder rolled softly over the city skyline outside. Normally Ethan would send an assistant to retrieve it, but Caleb decided to bring it himself. Maybe because he missed Ethan. Maybe because some foolish part of him still hoped that seeing each other outside the penthouse might make him feel less invisible. The lobby of Whitmore Holdings smelled like polished marble and fresh coffee. Employees rushed through the massive glass building carrying tablets and paperwork while soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers overhead. Caleb clutched Ethan's laptop bag as he approached the private executive elevators. The receptionist recognized him. Immediately. She always did. But just like everyone else in Ethan's world, she pretended not to know what he truly was. "Mr. Whitmore is still in the conference room on 48, she said politely. "You can leave that with me." "It is okay," Caleb answered softly. "I will bring it up." The elevator ride felt strangely long. Caleb stared at his reflection in the mirrored walls and barely recognized himself anymore. He looked exhausted. Smaller somehow. Like years of loving Ethan in silence had slowly erased pieces of him one by one. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, the hallway was nearly empty. Most employees had already gone home for the night. Warm light spilled from the conference room near the corner office, where low voices echoed faintly through the partially open door. Caleb slowed when he heard Ethan speaking. "The engagement announcement should happen before summer," another man said calmly. Caleb recognized the voice immediately. Richard Whitmore. Ethan's father. "The Vale family wants stability before the merger proceeds." Silence followed before Ethan answered. "I know." Caleb's footsteps stopped completely. Rain tapped softly against the massive windows surrounding the city beyond. "And the Omega?" Richard asked next. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Ethan did not answer right away. Then finally quietly he said, "Caleb is not a problem. You have been saying that for 5 years." Richard's voice carried mild irritation now. "If he expected more from you, there would already be complications." Ethan sighed tiredly. "He knows how things are." Caleb stood frozen outside the door, fingers tightening around the laptop strap until they hurt. "Does he?" Richard asked coldly. "Or does he simply love you enough to accept crumbs?" Something inside Caleb cracked silently at those words. For one desperate second, he waited for Ethan to defend him. To say Caleb was not crumbs. Caleb was not a secret. Caleb was not a problem to manage after the merger. Instead, Ethan laughed softly. Softly, like the conversation barely mattered. "Caleb will wait," he said. "He always does." The world went completely still. Caleb could hear his own heartbeat pounding inside his ears while those 4 words echoed through him again and again. "He always does." Not Caleb loves me. Not Caleb matters. Not Caleb deserves better. Just certainty. Ownership. Confidence that no matter how many times Ethan placed him second, Caleb would remain exactly where Ethan left him. Tears burned behind Caleb's eyes, but he refused to let them fall in the hallway of Ethan's perfect world. He set the laptop bag quietly beside the conference room door without making a sound. Then he turned around and walked back toward the elevators before Ethan could ever know he had been there. Outside, rain poured across downtown Chicago in silver sheets. Caleb stood beneath the building awning for several seconds, staring blankly at headlights reflecting across wet pavement. His phone buzzed in his pocket. "Ethan." Caleb looked at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hey," Ethan said distractedly. Voices echoed faintly behind him from the meeting room. "Did you see my laptop anywhere?" Caleb closed his eyes. "Yes." "Can you bring it tomorrow morning?" "I need it tonight, but I will survive." Caleb almost laughed at the irony. Ethan had no idea Caleb had already carried his entire heart into that building only to walk back out with nothing left. "Okay," Caleb whispered. "Caleb?" Ethan's voice softened slightly. "What is wrong?" Caleb looked up at the towering Whitmore building disappearing into storm clouds overhead. For the first time in 5 years, he finally understood the truth clearly. Ethan had never been afraid Caleb would leave. And maybe that was exactly why Caleb had to. Caleb did not leave dramatically. There was no screaming argument. No shattered glass. No desperate goodbye beneath pouring rain like the scenes people imagined when love finally died. The end of 5 years happened quietly on a Sunday morning while sunlight spilled across the penthouse kitchen and Ethan stood at the counter answering emails between bites of toast. Caleb watched him from across the room and realized something terrifying. Ethan looked completely safe. Completely certain. Like nothing in his world could possibly change. That certainty was what finally broke the last fragile piece of Caleb's heart. Ethan glanced up from his phone. "You are staring." Caleb smiled faintly. "I am memorizing you." Ethan barely reacted to the words, too distracted by whatever crisis existed inside his inbox. "Long week," he muttered. "My father wants another dinner with the Valles tonight." Caleb stirred cream into his untouched coffee slowly. "Do you want to go?" "Not particularly." Ethan sighed and rubbed tiredly at his eyes. "But these things matter right now." Caleb nodded because that answer no longer surprised him. Everything mattered right now except them. Ethan finally looked up again after several seconds of silence. "You are quiet lately." Caleb almost laughed. Ethan had spent years teaching him silence. "Just tired." Ethan stood and crossed the kitchen toward him. Even now, Caleb's chest tightened when Ethan came close. That was the cruelest part of love sometimes. The heart continued reaching for someone long after the mind understood that staying beside them was slowly destroying you. Ethan rested one hand against Caleb's cheek. "After all of this settles down, we should take a trip somewhere." Caleb looked into his gray eyes. "Where?" "Anywhere you want." "You said that last year too." Ethan frowned slightly, like he genuinely could not understand why Caleb kept remembering promises he never fulfilled. "Caleb. It is okay." Caleb forced a soft smile. "You should get ready for work." Ethan hesitated before leaning down and kissing Caleb's forehead gently. "Wait for me tonight?" Caleb closed his eyes briefly at the familiar words. Then he whispered, "Okay." Ethan left 20 minutes later. The penthouse fell silent the moment the elevator doors closed behind him. Caleb stood motionless in the kitchen, listening to the empty stillness surrounding him. 5 years. 5 years of loving Ethan Whitmore so completely that somewhere along the way Caleb had stopped existing outside of him. Slowly, Caleb walked toward the bedroom. He opened the closet and stared at rows of expensive suits beside his own smaller section tucked quietly into the corner like an afterthought. Then he reached for a suitcase. The first shirt Caleb folded was the blue sweater Ethan once said made his eyes look brighter. The second was an old college sweatshirt Caleb wore before he ever met Ethan, back when his life still felt like it belonged to him. Piece by piece, he packed quietly while sunlight drifted across the hardwood floors. There were not as many things as he expected. That realization hurt too. He had spent years building a life inside this penthouse, yet somehow almost none of it truly felt like his. Around noon, Caleb paused beside the bookshelf in the living room. A framed photograph from Maine still rested there. Ethan's hand around his waist. Both of them smiling beneath summer sunlight. Caleb stared at it for a long moment before carefully placing the frame face down inside a drawer. Some memories were too painful to carry forward. By evening, the suitcase sat beside the front door. The penthouse looked strangely untouched, as if Caleb had never existed there at all. He removed the small silver bonding ring Ethan gave him during their second year together. Not an official bond. Not a public promise. Just enough affection to keep Caleb holding on. Caleb placed it gently on the kitchen counter beside Ethan's favorite coffee mug. Then he wrote a single sentence on a piece of stationery from the desk drawer. "I waited until there was nothing left of me." Outside, Chicago glowed gold beneath the setting sun while traffic moved endlessly through the streets below. Caleb took one final look around the apartment that had once felt like love and now only felt lonely. Then he picked up his suitcase and walked out the front door without crying once. And somewhere across the city, Ethan Whitmore sat beside another Omega at another dinner table, completely unaware that for the first time in 5 years, Caleb Monroe was no longer waiting for him at all. Ethan realized something was wrong the second he stepped into the penthouse. It was not obvious at first. The lights were still on. Soft jazz still played quietly from hidden speakers near the kitchen. Caleb's favorite candle still burned beside the bookshelf, carrying the faint scent of vanilla and cedar through the apartment. Everything looked normal. But the air felt different. Empty somehow. Ethan loosened his tie while walking toward the kitchen, exhaustion heavy in his bones after another endless dinner filled with forced smiles and conversations he barely heard. Adrian Vale had spent most of the evening discussing wedding venues their families wanted them to consider. Ethan had nearly snapped by the end of dessert. He was tired of pretending. Tired of hearing Caleb's quiet, disappointed voice echo inside his head every time someone referred to Adrian as his future Omega. Tonight, for the first time in months, Ethan had finally made a decision. He would end it all. The merger talks. The engagement expectations. The endless obedience that had slowly turned his life into something unrecognizable. He had spent years convincing himself Caleb would understand just a little longer. But somewhere during dinner, watching Adrian speak while waiters refilled crystal glasses around them, Ethan realized he could not remember the last genuine conversation he had with the person he actually loved. So he left early. For Caleb. The thought almost made him smile as he walked farther into the apartment. Caleb? Silence answered him softly. Ethan frowned. Usually Caleb appeared when he came home, drawn instinctively toward him after years together. Ethan set his keys beside the counter and finally noticed it. The coffee mug. His favorite black ceramic mug sat alone near the kitchen island. Beside it rested a silver ring. Ethan stopped breathing for half a second. Slowly, he picked it up. The small unofficial bonding ring gleamed coldly beneath the kitchen lights. Caleb never removed it. Not once in 3 years. A strange unease curled sharply through Ethan's chest. Caleb? He called again, louder this time. Nothing. Ethan moved quickly now, crossing the penthouse toward the bedroom. The moment he opened the closet door, panic hit him fully for the first time. Caleb's clothes were gone. The shelves sat half empty. The blue sweater Caleb always wore during thunderstorms had disappeared. The old sneakers by the dresser were missing too. Ethan stared at the empty spaces like his mind refused to understand what his eyes already knew. No. He grabbed his phone and dialed Caleb's number. Straight to voicemail. Ethan called again. And again. Each unanswered ring tightened something painful inside his ribs. Then he saw the note lying quietly beneath the coffee mug back in the kitchen. Ethan unfolded it with unsteady fingers. I waited until there was nothing left of me. The words hit harder than any scream could have. Ethan sank slowly into one of the kitchen chairs, staring at the note, while silence swallowed the massive penthouse whole. Suddenly he noticed all the little absences everywhere. Caleb's blanket no longer draped over the couch. His favorite tea box had vanished from the cabinet. The old college sweatshirt Ethan secretly loved seeing on him was gone. Even the scent lingering in the apartment felt weaker already, fading like sunlight at the end of the day. Ethan pressed one hand against his mouth, heart pounding in a way he had not felt in years. Caleb left. Caleb actually left. The certainty Ethan had carried for 5 years shattered all at once. He always does. The memory of his own voice made him feel sick. Ethan stood abruptly and grabbed his coat again. He drove through downtown Chicago past midnight, searching every place Caleb loved. Emma's apartment. The bookstore near Oak Street. The tiny bakery in Lincoln Park where Caleb bought cinnamon rolls on Sundays. Nothing. No one had seen him, or no one was willing to say. Around 2 a.m, Ethan parked beside Lake Michigan and sat motionless behind the steering wheel while cold rain streaked across the windshield. For years, he believed Caleb would wait forever because Caleb always had. But now the city felt unbearably large without him somewhere inside it. Ethan looked down at the silver ring clenched tightly in his hand and finally understood the truth too late. Caleb had not left because he stopped loving Ethan. He left because loving Ethan had slowly destroyed him. The first month after Caleb disappeared felt unreal to Ethan, like living inside a city where gravity had suddenly changed. Everything looked the same on the surface. Whitmore Holdings continued climbing higher. Meetings still filled his calendar from dawn until midnight. Reporters still followed him outside corporate events. His father still discussed merger contracts over expensive bourbon like nothing important had happened at all. But Ethan moved through those days hollowed out from the inside. The penthouse became unbearable almost immediately. Every room carried traces of Caleb that refused to disappear completely. A forgotten hair tie inside the bathroom drawer. One of Caleb's books tucked crookedly onto the living room shelf. A grocery list in Caleb's handwriting still stuck to the refrigerator. At night, Ethan would wake instinctively reaching toward the other side of the bed, only to find cold empty sheets waiting for him instead. That silence destroyed him more than arguments ever could have. 2 weeks after Caleb left, Ethan ended the engagement discussions with the Vale family. His father nearly exploded with fury inside the executive boardroom. "You are throwing away $1 billion merger over an Omega who abandoned you," Richard Whitmore snapped. Ethan stood near the windows overlooking downtown Chicago, exhaustion carved deep beneath his eyes. "He did not abandon me." "Then where is he?" Ethan had no answer. Because despite all his power, all his connections, all the influence attached to the Whitmore name, he could not find Caleb anywhere. Emma refused to speak to him after their second conversation. Caleb's old landlord claimed forwarding information did not exist. His social media accounts vanished within days. Even his phone number eventually disconnected. It was like Caleb had erased himself from Ethan's world with surgical precision. And maybe he had planned the escape longer than Ethan realized. Summer arrived over Chicago in heavy golden heat. Ethan barely noticed. He searched constantly now. Quietly. Desperately. Every business trip became an excuse to look for Caleb somewhere new. Boston. Seattle. Portland. Austin. Tiny bookstores. Coffee shops. Farmers markets. Anywhere Caleb once mentioned wanting to visit during late-night conversations Ethan used to half-listen to while answering work emails. Once, in Denver, Ethan nearly stopped breathing after spotting someone with Caleb's curls crossing a crowded street. He followed the stranger for 3 blocks before realizing it was not him. That night, Ethan sat alone in a hotel room staring at his reflection and finally admitted something terrifying to himself. He had spent years believing Caleb needed him more. But the truth was exactly the opposite. Caleb had been the center of every quiet, human part Ethan still possessed. Without him, everything else felt cold and pointless. In September, Ethan visited Lake Michigan for the first time since Caleb left. Wind rolled across the shoreline carrying the scent of rain and approaching autumn. Caleb loved this place during colder months, when tourists disappeared and the city felt softer somehow. Ethan stood near the water for almost an hour before noticing something carved into the wooden bench nearby. Waited long enough. The words were small and fading from age and weather, probably written by a stranger years ago. But Ethan's chest tightened so sharply he had to sit down. Because suddenly he remembered every single time Caleb looked at him hoping for more. More honesty. More courage. More love spoken aloud instead of hidden behind closed doors. Ethan had always assumed there would be time later to fix things properly. Later to choose Caleb publicly. Later to become brave enough. But later never arrived. Winter returned again before Ethan finally stopped expecting Caleb to walk through the penthouse doors. Somehow that hurt even more. Acceptance felt heavier than hope. One snowy evening, Ethan stood alone in the kitchen holding Caleb's silver ring beneath the soft overhead lights. He had carried it everywhere for months now like punishment. Like prayer. The apartment around him remained painfully quiet except for distant traffic far below the windows. Then his phone buzzed suddenly against the counter. Unknown number. Ethan answered immediately, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Hello? Silence greeted him for 2 endless seconds. Then a woman's voice spoke softly. Mr. Whitmore? Ethan straightened instantly. Yes. I think I know where Caleb Monroe is. The town of Seabrook sat along the Oregon coast like something pulled from an old postcard. Small bookstores lined quiet streets. Fishing boats drifted across gray morning water. Salt filled the air instead of traffic and cold steel and ambition. It felt impossibly far away from Chicago. Ethan arrived just after sunrise beneath a sky heavy with mist and pale silver clouds. The woman who called him owned a tiny bakery near the harbor. She recognized Caleb from an article about Whitmore Holdings months earlier and only reached out because she had seen Ethan searching again after another public interview. Ethan thanked her 3 times before leaving the bakery with shaking hands in one direction toward the shoreline. He walks there every morning around 8, she had said softly. Then she paused, looked him directly in the eyes, and added, Please do not hurt him again. Those words followed Ethan all the way to the ocean. Wind rolled sharply across the beach, carrying the sound of waves breaking against dark rocks below the cliffs. Ethan walked slowly along the shore, heart pounding harder with every step. Part of him still believed this could end like a dream. Caleb turning around. Caleb smiling softly. Caleb forgiving him because Caleb always had before. Then Ethan saw him. Caleb stood near the water wearing a cream-colored sweater beneath a long dark coat, hands tucked into his pockets while gulls circled overhead. His curls moved softly in the wind. For a moment, Ethan could not breathe at all. Caleb looked healthy. Peaceful. Not broken and lonely the way Ethan had imagined during all those sleepless nights back in Chicago. The sight hurt more than it should have. Because it meant Caleb had truly learned how to live without him. Ethan stepped forward slowly. Caleb. The name disappeared into the ocean wind. Caleb froze. Several long seconds passed before he finally turned around. Their eyes met across the empty shoreline for the first time in nearly a year. Ethan felt every missed phone call, every unfinished conversation, every broken promise crash into him all at once. Caleb looked different now. Softer around the sadness that once lived permanently inside him. Like leaving Chicago had allowed him to breathe again. You found me, Caleb said quietly. Ethan stopped a few feet away, terrified that getting any closer might make Caleb disappear again. I looked everywhere. Caleb glanced toward the ocean before answering. I know. Ethan swallowed hard. Why did you never answer me? A faint tired smile crossed Caleb's face. Because if I heard your voice, I probably would have come back. The honesty inside those words nearly shattered Ethan completely. He stepped closer instinctively. Caleb, I ended everything with the Valles. I told my father no. I should have done it sooner, and I know that now. I know I ruined everything, but please. His voice broke roughly for the first time in years. Please come home. Caleb looked at him sadly. Not angrily. Somehow that was worse. Home? He repeated softly. Ethan, that penthouse never felt like home to me. It felt like a waiting room. Ethan flinched visibly. Wind moved between them while waves rolled endlessly against the shore below. I loved you, Ethan whispered. Caleb's eyes filled with something painful and old. I know. I still do. Caleb closed his eyes briefly before looking back at him. But love is supposed to make room for someone inside your life. I spent 5 years standing outside yours, hoping one day you would finally open the door. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the silver ring he had carried every day since Caleb left. His hand trembled slightly as he held it out. I was wrong, he said quietly. About everything. Caleb stared at the ring for several silent seconds before gently pushing Ethan's hand back toward him. You were just too late. The words settled between them heavier than the ocean fog surrounding the beach. Ethan looked at Caleb like a man watching the last piece of his world slip away beyond reach. So this is it? Caleb glanced toward the distant horizon, where pale sunlight finally broke through the clouds over the water. No, he answered softly. This is just the first time I finally chose myself to. Then Caleb stepped backwards slowly before turning toward the shoreline path leading back into town. Ethan stood frozen beside the ocean as Caleb walked away from him one final time. Halfway up the path, Caleb paused when Ethan whispered his name again behind him. For one impossible hopeful second, Ethan thought Caleb might turn around. But Caleb only closed his eyes against the wind, held his coat tighter around himself, and kept walking forward without looking back.